Victory Studios in downtown Little Rock, this is Capitol View.
And welcome to the program. Happy New Year to you. I'm Roby Brock. Thanks for joining us here on Capitol View. I am joined by U.S. Representative French Hill. He's a Republican, represents from Little Rock, represents the 2nd Congressional District of Arkansas. Good to see you, sir.
Good to be with you. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you as well. I want to start with a quote from your favorite congressman, Representative Andy Biggs, Republican of Arizona.
Yep.
He says this past week that the Republican Party has nothing to campaign on. Tell me what this Congress has done so far.
Well, Andy is channeling his inner Chip Roy of Texas, Congressman Chip Roy of Texas. We have a very narrow majority in the House, and
it's narrower than it used to be.
Correct,
yes.
And an even more narrow majority for Chuck Schumer, the Democrat leader in the Senate. So it has been a tough year to try to get bills to the president's desk. But we passed energy independence, something that was a priority for the House Republican Conference, that we want an all-of-the-above energy strategy for the United States. We passed H.R. 2, which reforms the immigration system and improves border security. I think that was an important bill. We passed that, a major issue, and we're going to, I just got back from the border. We'll talk about that. We talked about education reform, workforce reform. We've passed those bills. We brought Joe Biden to the table on reducing crime in the state, in the District of Columbia, where carjackings took off, and so we've reformed laws there. And then we've done things on education. And I'll say this. We have a record amount of bills passed through committee. And the final point I made, it was House Republicans that led the way to try to avoid a government shutdown, have an alternative to the debt ceiling, and bring spending back to pre-pandemic levels. So a lot of the year was around that spending fight, and we know that. But we did have some good policy wins that we've passed and that are sitting in the Senate. And I think the biggest, most important thing done during the year, though, was to set that standard to try to go back to pre-pandemic spending.
Yep. All right, so we got a lot to wade through on all this. Let's begin with immigration, illegal immigration. You mentioned H.R. 2. It's passed the House. It's sitting in the Senate. You guys went down to the U.S.-Mexico border this past week and basically tried to raise awareness on that issue. Some would call it a publicity stunt. You're there for the optics of it. There are critics of that immigration bill that basically say it is not going to fix some of the problems you want to see fixed. I'll give you an example.
Okay.
You guys are, you want to see more of the process steered towards ports of entry into the U.S., obviously, but there is not more funding in there for ports of entry. So won't you have more people coming through your channels there and not enough resources to deal with it?
Not in my view, because during the end of the Obama administration and all of the Trump administration, we actually expanded all the infrastructure, both security and volume, for both commercial and passenger traffic at all the ports of entry. And we expanded the green uniform, the Border Patrol, between the points of entry. What's created this catastrophe on the border, in my view, was Joe Biden's decision to not enforce the asylum rules in this country. So we've had 7 million encounters in the 3 years of his presidencies. He's admitted 3.3 million people into the country pending some sort of an immigration hearing. Trump moved that backwards because he had his Remain in Mexico policy, which was in compliance with federal law. So in H.R. 2, the top changes in H.R. 2, in my view, besides technology and manpower, is we raise the standard for credible fear if you're going to seek asylum in the United States. And we tell the federal government to enforce the filing of that asylum claim from a safe third country. You don't get to file and argue for asylum in the U.S.
Do you think that, how much of the 3.3 million that you think are seeking asylum, those numbers that you just threw out there, do you think that they're all valid? Do you think that there's a certain percentage that's valid? Do you think that there's an increase of people's needing to seek asylum in the U.S.? When you look at what's happening
in the world,
I mean, I think there's a pretty strong argument to be made.
Well, I'd say less than 10% might qualify, based on the statistics that we've seen in recent years as well as historically. You cannot come to the United States and seek asylum for an economic reason. And most of the people coming here are seeking work, they're seeking to improve their life, which is true, but they need to apply for an immigration process and just apply to come to the United States to work. But that's not what they're doing. They're claiming that they will be killed in their home country if they go back, and they're seeking asylum based on that, when it's really an economic claim. Judges in this country will not accept that as a reason for asylum. So I think based on the statistics I've seen, it'd probably be less than 10% of those people might be eligible for asylum.
What happened, just out of lack of knowledge on my end, what happens if you're here in the U.S., you're applying for asylum, you don't get the asylum that you seek because your claim is not valid?
Right.
They deport you at that point in time, or are you lost in the system somewhere?
Well, if you show up for your court date and you are denied in a judge, you're deported.
What do employers tell you is needed in terms of immigration reform? Because there is a huge gap between number of job openings that are out there, number of workers available, and particularly in some of those areas of work where you don't have Americans applying for those jobs.
Correct. I've always argued, and I thought it was a mistake in federal policy over the last 30 or 40 years to do away with regular work visas for people who want to come seasonal work in our timberlands, on our shores, for holiday traffic in the summer or in agricultural purposes. That old Rosario program from the 60s, that kind of e-verified work process with a work permit that you can come back and forth across the border, I think would ease the burden on the illegal immigration side, give people the chance to come into the American economy periodically during the year, earn some money, and go back to their home country. But we don't have that. I support that. That's something that a lot of people in Congress have supported. We've tried to find consensus to add that. Certainly in the agricultural states, many support that.
We've talked about this H.R. 2, which is the Republican House-passed immigration reform bill sitting in the Senate. Where do you think the possibilities for compromise exist? And not just on Senate side in terms of Republicans and Democrats, then it's got to come back to the House and be accepted in some form.
Well, I've always argued, I really think this definition of credible fear and enforcing federal law that you need to claim asylum from a safe third country is a place for, that's the law. It was passed by Democrats, and I bet Schumer and Biden voted for it in the past in their long 5-decade careers in the Senate. So I think that's a key place, because we've already compromised on technology, border funding, ports of entry improvement that you raised, and many of those issues. But the magnet that attracts people to the border to come and try to get in the country is this idea that you can come into the U.S., claim asylum, be paid while you're here to have a work permit and get certain federal benefits, and you can just stay in the country. That's, I think, what drives a lot of this, and so that's where I think
should there be a path to citizenship?
I think if you follow the rules, but none of these people are following those rules.
Yeah. All right. Last question before we got to take a break here. This has all been tied also to aid in Ukraine, at least on the Senate side. That's where the negotiation is, as well as Israel, and I think into the in the Pacific theater as well. Why can't we separate those?
Well, one reason is to increase the number of votes by Republicans in the House is the blunt answer to that question. I support military support for Ukraine. I support military support for Taiwan. I support military support for Israel. I don't support the levels or necessarily the design that Joe Biden's proposed, but that's why we have a Congress, and we've been debating that now for 3 months. I've worked hours and hours on it. I don't feel an obligation to connect them personally, but that's a decision of the House leadership, that the biggest domestic problem that we face that is a national security problem is our open border. And we can do both, and we should fix it. Over 300 people caught on the terror watch list at the border. How many did we not catch? So this is a catastrophe.
Might be catching them all.
Well, don't know, because we don't know what we don't catch at the port of entry. And so I think it's an important issue to get more votes from Republicans in the Senate and Republicans in the House. Connecting the dots to shut down this open border is what it's going to take.
All right, got to take a quick commercial break. We're going to come back with more with Representative French Hill right after this.
We're watching Capitol View, Sunday morning talk focused on the political scene in Arkansas.
Welcome back to the program. I'm with Congressman French Hill of the 2nd District of Arkansas. All right, let's shift to some other topics of conversation. A little bit of it's related here, but we have some looming deadlines for potential government shutdown. I think January 19th is a big deadline, February 2nd, another big deadline. What's it going to take to avoid a government shutdown?
Only Congress would set a deadline on Groundhog Day, right?
Right.
This is really frustrating to me. 2023, there was so much wasted time. We had a debt ceiling deal between House Republicans led by then Kevin McCarthy, Speaker of the House, and Joe Biden, President, that would have allowed us to get our appropriations work done in time, and we squandered that. And then we made it worse by throwing Kevin McCarthy out of office. But we did pass 7 of the 12 bills across the House floor. We got all of them through committee.
These are appropriations
bills.
Right.
So we got our work done in the House. The Senate's passed a couple across the Senate floor. But my hope was that between November and December, Chuck Schumer would agree to those Fiscal Responsibility Act spending levels, which the House has agreed to, and that he would make progress and we would go to conference during kind of the holidays, staff level conference work. And we have not. So I go into Congress coming back in session next week with a lot of trepidation about how we're going to evade a shutdown or another continuing resolution, and I think it's going to be a very big challenge. I really don't. I don't have a crystal ball on how we're going to get that done in the next 3 weeks.
Yeah. So have there been any conversations? I mean, have you had conversations during this holiday break with some of your peers about what you're going to do when you get back?
We have been. I've worked quite a bit on the supplemental appropriation to support Israel, Ukraine, and Taiwan and the parameters of that. I've spent a lot of my time on that during the holidays, and there's been some staff work on that. But at the top of the Congress, the House leadership and the Senate leadership, they have not had a four corners discussion of the appropriations process. Speaker Johnson has given the cardinals of his appropriation process, including our own Steve Womack here in Arkansas, work to get this done at the Fiscal Responsibility Act level, but Chuck Schumer has not done that for the Senate. So we literally go back into session next week in the Senate and the House, in my judgment, without the kind of top line leadership that we need to get this done before January 19th and February 2nd.
Groundhog Day.
Groundhog Day.
Yeah. We've seen this
Bill
show.
Murray
We've seen this show
Bill
before.
Murray will be on my wake-up call.
All right, a couple other topics that will just be more potpourri here, miscellaneous as we go. This last week, we've seen a commander of the 188th Force here in Arkansas resign. Governor Sarah Sanders says it was because he does not support personally the abortion policy of the U.S. military. Where do you stand on that issue in terms of should abortion be legal for military people, that they should be able to go across party lines because they're not able to control where they are stationed?
Yeah. Well, in the National Defense Authorization Bill that was signed into law by President Biden, there is a very limited ability for people to seek, health care, which I assume it's the way it's described as health care, but I assume one could interpret it to be, an abortion service in a state outside where their base is located. That bill was signed into law. I voted for it. It's apparently a very, very tiny number of people who avail themselves of potentially that service. So I think it's a complex issue. I'm a pro-life member of Congress, but I recognize that, you have to deal with the big picture. And there's a lot of controversy in and around our National Defense Authorization strategy, and House Republicans, I think, did a good job moving as much of our policy through that process as we could.
Senator Tom Cotton joined Governor Sanders in endorsing President Donald Trump this last week. Where do you stand on your endorsement for the President of the United States? I think the last time you were on this show, we talked about it, and you were kind of open to whoever comes up.
Well, I said I'd support the Republican nominee. Right. That's true. But from the very beginning, I've said I don't think either party should nominate President Trump or President Biden, and that I wanted somebody on the Republican side that was younger, that could do a good job, be more certain that they could be elected as President of the United States because of the damage done by the Biden administration, and serve 8 years. So I continue to wait for this primary process.
Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis fit that description?
They do fit that description. They're former governors. Asa Hutchinson fits that description, but he's made no traction whatsoever in the Republican primary electorate. You've got to have that ability to be nominated, true, and be elected President of the United States. And so I've just said, really for the better part of 3 years now, that in my perfect world, I'd like to have a younger candidate, somebody like a former governor, who can serve 8 years and turn this economy and national security disaster around that we've been left with Joe Biden.
I think very highly of Governor Asa Hutchinson, but he's not much younger than the current candidates up there as well. So, although he projects a much more youthful appearance there. So take that for what it's worth, Governor Hutchinson. We do like you. All right, French Hill, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Robbie. Good to be with you.
For
Happy
joining
New
us.
Year.
Yeah, you too. All right, we're back with more right after this.